So, big in the news are the Democratic Socialists of America communists. Depending on who you ask or how you ask, you're likely to get very different answers. Many conservatives use the term leftist, socialist, communist, progressive, and liberal as fairly interchangeable terms. And that's fine for red meat narratives to a right wing base, but it creates issues when trying to explain the nuances to the normies. Rather than being synonymous, most of these terms would actually be good headings for a Venn diagram, as they have concepts in each of them that overlap each other. Now, I've gone over some of this background in other videos, so apologies to my regular viewers if you're hearing the same thing again. The modern launch of socialism came in concert with theorizing how to transfer the vast wealth of the nobility and the church to the people of France prior to the Revolution, and during and after too. But the idea was how to socialize the property and wealth, making it the property of society as a whole rather than the individuals in nobility or the organization of the church. And there were many ideas under this umbrella that was called socialism. Some had currency, some envisioned systems without, some had property, some had none. Some had ideas of things being possessed rather than owned, odd nuances. Some uh, looked at things as a nation, others looked at being ownership by the nation. Others looked at it as like communal local arrangements of how things might be owned. And the variations were truly legion. Karl Marx created what was essentially a grand unification hypothesis to implement socialism. For reasons far beyond the scope of this video, the overwhelming majority of socialists and anarchists embraced his concept. So much so that any variant that veers from Marxism to them is not real socialism. Now, for some adherents, there are acceptable deviations from Marxism that allows you to really be a socialist. Marx envisioned the first step in his system requiring violent revolution or civil war. A lot of people needed to die to make his system work, and that's not just consequential. He said it as a matter of fact. It was part of what had to happen. For some, any deviation from the violent aspect makes you not a Marxist and not a socialist. And also, Marx was quite clear that capitalism would diminish the standard of living, resulting in inevitable revolutions. The second step of Marxism is the dictatorship of the proletariat. At this point, the revolution or civil war has been won. The collective winners, the victorious masses, decide on an interim method of how all the property is to be held. Lenin ended up deviating from this with his vanguard party concept. The third step to communism, or the Marxist theory, is socialism in daily life. Essentially, all aspects of property production and exchange have been socialized. They are collectively held in some manner, presumably determined by the previously mentioned dictatorship of the proletariat. In practice, this collective holding is delegated, by choice or force, to a governing body. The final phase of Marxism is the melting away of the central government in favor of local communes running their own affairs. Thus, communism. The final phase of communism can also be classified as anarchy. Many socialists jumped on board Marxist communist idea in hopes of reaching total socialism. Many probably didn't care if the system ever advanced to the final stage where everything melted away. And due to how little effort Marx put into that part of it, he may have not really cared either. Anarchists initially jumped on board, but many left with what was known as the red-black split, believing no system would ever make it past the third stage because no person would ever surrender all that power. So this ends up setting up linguistic murkiness. Some of this is a function of honest beliefs, and then some of it is pure subterfuge. In the wake of Marx, it would be possible for a person to be socialist without being a Marxist. However, the identity of socialists and Marxists were so heavily intertwined that from the mid 1800s until pretty much the end of World War II, the two terms were nearly universally seen as synonymous. People could and did use the terms interchangeably. Both insiders, socialists and communists, and outsiders, the people who weren't, both. The revolutions of 1848 spread over most of Europe, and the causes were wildly different in each country. Economic rights in some places, nationalists in others, and the only revolution that came close to succeeding was Hungary. Marxists had a lot of hope riding on these revolutions, thinking they might be the beginning of their time, that Marx's predictions were coming true. Most European governments followed the revolutions by enacting reforms, greatly expanding the powers of their parliaments, and this resulted in social pressure relief and also the beginning of economic improvement for all classes. The failures of the revolutions, the calming of the populace, and the improvement of the standard of living created growing doubts in Marx's inevitable revolutions. Now, Marx believed they were still coming. His followers were starting to doubt it. By the 1860s, these doubts translated into the Social Democrat movement. The Social Democrat movement openly disavowed revolution as the method to bring change. Their goal was slow, methodical implementation of socialism via the ballot box. All Social Democrats wanted increased socialized control of property, means of production, and means of exchange. Preferably, it would end in total control, just as Marx had described his socialism in daily life. Because of their disavowal of violent takeover, the rest of the Marxists and communists deemed them to be splitters, not real socialists, not real communists. The Social Democrats were happy with this distinction. If the populace did not think of them as communists and Marxists, it was actually really good for their public and polling image. The American Socialist Party is a child of the Social Democrat movement and is an indirect lineage to Marx. They essentially want everything Marx wanted, at least up until the socialist phase of things, just not via revolution. Now, the American Socialist Party was a growing political threat through the late 1800s up until about 1930. They did successfully elect candidates in large cities, city councils and mayors, to be specific, and they did manage to elect two socialists to the House of Representatives under the name of their party. A combination of events would end their rise to power. First, the U.S. system doesn't effectively work with third parties. If a third party gets too prominent, it tends to get absorbed by the other parties. The politics of the 30s caused the Democrats and Republicans to appropriate socialist ideas, and this caused the Socialist Party to lose a lot of momentum. Many effective activists ended up leaving the Socialist Party and joining primarily the Democratic Party to run as Trojan horses. Some made it to the Republicans as well. And World War II ended up tarnishing the image of socialism in general. Post-World War II, anti-communist activity in the United States made the term socialism a fully dirty word, and any serious candidate would avoid it at all costs. So, are the Democratic Socialists of America communists? Well, it depends who's asking. Depends who you ask. If you are a stickler on Marxian ideology, then some might not be. Unless they have hard definable lines between where we are and where socialism in daily life occurs, then for all intents and purposes, outside of being pedantic, yes, they are communistic. Socialists of America are much like homosexuals coming out of the closet. They have been hiding in the primarily in the Democratic Party and trying not to completely out themselves by being too flamboyantly socialist. Because of a combination of poor education and outright undermining of the education system, a large group of younger Americans are oblivious to the history of socialism and Marxism. Thus, the Democratic Socialists of America are now out of the closet, fully flaming and doing doing it in public. How this change occurred ends up being a much longer story, perhaps for another time. So, in the comments below, have you been following any of this stuff with the Democratic Socialists of America? Is it a news item that's been on your radar, or have you been completely oblivious to it? Is it something that's concerning you, or do you think it's just kind of a lot of noise at the edge that's being amplified? Let me know in the comments below. Please smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithms brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, take a look at my other titles. You'll probably find things you like. It's worth subscribing to. And if you know someone who might find this interesting, share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.